I'm happy to share my family's journey through its trials and tribulations of preserving the land and intergenerational wealth. So I have some bullet points presented there just to give you a chronology of our land in family land. In 1906, our grandfather purchased the first parcel, and I misspoke, it wasn't 56 acres, it was 11 acres for $56.25. So that was roughly $5.11 an acre, and this was generation one. Between the years of 1906 to 1975, which is roughly, almost 70 years, two additional parcels were purchased. The land was farmed, mostly raising tobacco, wheat, and corn. And I went back to the old farm place, family homestead, and found in the attic actual records that my grandfather kept for over 50 years. And saw that between 1914 and 1965, a total of about 94,000 pounds of tobacco was raised and sold. My grandfather was a meticulous record keeper. He was literate. He wrote down everything and saved everything. I also saw records that showed between 1948 and 1965, corn and wheat were also raised. In addition, my grandmother had her own account. That was her cooking money. She would raise flowers. She would raise eggs, raise chickens that would lay eggs, and she sold those eggs. So she had her own little industry going on the side, raised butter. So jumping forward to 1975, my grandfather died without a will, and there were 13 members of generation, what I will call generation two, which are would be his children. 12 members of generation two died between 1975 and 2011. 2011, the last two were remaining. One of those individuals was an aunt who we cared for. We said, "Aunt, please write your will." She wrote a will so that her interest would be specified and protected. She had only one son. She lost that son. So, and then some of those generation two members did not have wills. So they died intestate and property went outside of the family. Between 2011, we were actually trying to identify which heirs were left. What percentage interest did they have? And of course, I am the one in the family that records the genealogy. So fortunately, we had that information. We contacted a land use attorney to help us guide, think about next steps. Between 2011 and 2012, another generation two member died. That was the last member of that generation two line. And we had 16 descendants of generation three. I am a member of generation three. So these were grandchildren of the generation one. We started to have our first meeting. We had 16 people living in 5 different states. This was before Zoom. Trying to have a telephone conference call was as you can imagine, a challenge. Finally, between 2012 and 2014, we said, okay, let's have our property analyzed as far as title. What's the history of the title? We needed to make sure that we had affidavits of heirship filed, meaning who was exactly an heir. There were some adoption questions that came up. We had about 4 or 5 family meetings, definitely 4 annual ones, but we did have family meetings to develop what I later learned was called a land ethic. And I have a slide at the end to show you some components of a land ethic. We started thinking about drafting a LLC operating agreement because we did not want our family members to be personally liable for anything that happened. So we developed an LLC operating agreement. In the end of 2014 to 2015, we had our last remaining member of Generation 2 to draft a will. That person did. 2015, just in time, because 2015, that last remaining member of Generation 2 died. And then we were challenged with, in that area, the Atlantic Coastal Pipeline. So the Atlantic Coastal Pipeline was coming through the area as we were challenged trying to finalize our LLC. We did, and we were met with having to turn to legal advice to talk about eminent domain. We worked through those issues. We finally received our certification from the State Corporation Commission in 2016. And in 2017, the members of Generation 3, my generation, were able to deed their interest into the LLC with a general warranty deed. We were issued a tax ID. We filed our first LLC and tax filings in 2017. After 2017, 2 more members died. And we are now at the state where we have added an additional member of Generation 4, and we now have Generation 5 members that are in the wings waiting when they are of age and when their predecessors are deceased to have their membership into the family LLC recorded. I just want to end up this little piece of the presentation by saying that that original acre that was $5.11 value in 1906 has now been assessed per acre at $2,045. We formed what I later called, and if you would go to the land ethics piece, we did not know we were forming a family land ethic guideline, so to speak. We spent over 4 years discussing what was the future of the land. And we went back to our ancestors. We went back to my grandfather's orientation to the land. His orientation to the land was such that land and family, land stewardship and family were inseparable. If you work the land, touch the land, were part of the land, then it was inseparable. Our grandfather was a very religious man as well, and he did not want to do anything that would desecrate the land. So he believed strongly in bloodline. So that's why we said that the membership in the family LLC would have to be bloodline descendants. He wanted to make sure that we preserve intact family real estate assets. His parting words to us, and I remember them well, was do not sell the land. He wanted to make sure that the future generations were included in anything that was discussed as far as the future. So we also said that we needed to make sure that the next generation was part of the decision-making progress. By forming some of these ideas, we were able to keep family members connected to the land and to share, and hopefully they would have a shared family responsibility. We also decided that there would be no uses harmful to the land. So nothing that would impact the natural integrity of the land. And so this will guide us as far as thinking about what are the future uses of the land. It has to be something that is low impact, no harm, and that would be able to generate income for us. Although my family lived in a rural area in Buckingham and hunting for food was a necessity, he definitely disagreed with killing animals just to kill animals. So there would be no hunting for sport on the land. And if you are any ways in tune with Native American thoughts, you do not slaughter to slaughter. You even after the animal has been killed, it is blessed because that animal will contribute to, contribute as food. We believe that divided, we would each lose out, and by joining together, we would win and grow. Again, at the end, we closed always with a thought. One of the commandments of the Bible was to honor thy mother and father. In other words, respect the ancestors. We would always be challenged, and we're always challenged because there was going to be, when we felt family members who were not as close to our thinking as others. They would be disinterested. There would be a disconnect. They would want to immediately see some wealth from the land. They would want to have it sold and they would want their share. There were challenges with some members having wills and others not. Hidden descendants were maybe there. You don't ever know what's going to happen when you do the genealogy. And family members were going silent with us. We would contact them, we would ask them to get back to us, we'd ask them specific things to do, and they, yeah, I'll do it, but they did not do it. So some family members would go silent. And so from this learning experience, from this we learned that it's important to have constant and clear communication with your family members, that if you need legal advice, seek it. And that you need to continue and inform each other, and by all means move forward, even in the face of opposition or pushback. So I'll turn it over to you, Jania.
Mrs. Baskerville, thank you so much. This is just a wealth of information, and I hope that we are able to take some notes, listen to your experience, your words of wisdom, and to really follow this opportunity to do a chronological generation history reflection, so that you're combining your interest in genealogy in a way that benefits everyone in your family, and also how you came up with this family land ethic. It was just wonderful for you to connect us with Ms. Ebony Alexander, who is going to share a little bit more about African-American land ethic. And Ms. Alexander, I'm just going to let you jump right in.
Thank you so much, Ms. Luck. Good afternoon or good evening to everyone. And thank you so much for inviting me and the BFLT to share with you some of our programs. Just briefly, the Black Family Land Trust is one of the nation's only land trusts dedicated to the preservation and protection of African American and other historically underserved populations' land assets. We believe that land is an asset. It should be a performing asset for current and future generations. And as Ms. Baskerville just explained, how her family took their approach and kept the land, that was, when I heard it the first time, it made my heart smile. And I'm still smiling. So thank you for that, Ms. Baskerville and your family. We look at how we do our work so much differently than most land trusts. We have two core programs. One is RAP, which is wealth retention and asset protection, and the other is our land ethic. We created an African-American land ethic because so many of what Ms. Baskerville called the third and fourth generation didn't understand the relationship that we as African Americans have to the land, didn't understand the spiritual connection and our history to the land. All they could think about was what they had seen and learned in school, in many cases very negative, about slavery. As I always say to people, slavery was not our crazy, that was someone else's crazy, and we should not allow that crazy to separate us from our land assets. August 20th, 1619 is when we first landed here. It is also my birthday. So I always remember August the 20th as the date that the first Africans arrived here in Virginia. Can I have the next slide? And we start the land ethic at the Middle Passage. And this particular sculpture, which I absolutely love, by Jason Taylor, he is a sculptor who does sculptures that are used to rebuild the coral reefs across or around the world. This one, to me, reminds me, it has the features of people who were taken from Africa. I don't know where it is placed right now, but wherever it is part of where we as Africans were taken. And we know about 10% of the 12 to 13 million died in the Middle Passage. And to me, this pays homage to those people. Next slide, please. So when an old man or an elder dies, the library burns to the ground. That is kind of the basis of our land ethic. And we don't think about it. We don't think about the stories that we hear as children sitting at the feet of our elders, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. But those are the stories of our history here. And those are who we are. And they help build that family land ethic that will help you see the land. I always advocate that two things. All land and all children are not equal, and you have to make the land human. When you make the land human, you're more likely to keep your land. As I say to my daughter all the time, you get on my nerves, but I'll never sell you. So she's like my land. The land ethic has three core principles to it. The first one is the concept. This is the educational concept. What John Henry Clark says, what do people do for themselves depends upon what they think about themselves, which also depends upon what they know about themselves. And what they know about themselves depends upon what they have been taught about themselves. We have to re-educate ourselves. Next slide, please. The land ethic is a blend of phenomenology, land ethic by Aldo Leopold, and a definition of cultural competence based on HHS Office of Minority Health. We designed it because so many, as I said before, so many of our young people wanted to get rid of their land. This is particularly problematic when you think about land loss in America as it relates to the African-American community, and what that means, not just on our community psychologically, but what it means on our community financially, the mental impact, and the environmental and conservation impact. People like to think that African Americans don't think about the environment or conservation movements, but that is absolutely not true. We just didn't know we were supposed to check those boxes. I jokingly tell people I didn't know I was a conservationist until 2006 when working with the conservation movement, community. But what I learned from them was I was doing things that my father had taught me to do, and he was doing what his father had taught him to do, and his father before him. Those were conservation practices. We just didn't know we were supposed to check those boxes. But as a people, we are very, very conservation prone, and really understand that we have to protect the environment because the environment is our land. And we know that if we take care of our land, it will take care of you. Next slide, please. So in talking about our relationship to the land and how we help our young people understand, and even in today, as we're hearing discussions about reparations and what the American Rescue Plan will do, or what the Justice for Black Farmers does, it makes me think about this. If you were to look at the Declaration of Succession for the state of Mississippi, January 9th, 1861, they clearly state if they must subject to the degradation or the loss of property worth 4 billions of money, or we must succeed from the union framed by our fathers. That loss of property worth 4 billions of money is enslaved people. It is our ancestors. Now think about that, 4 billions of money. If you were to fast forward to today, and some calculators, that's in excess of $105 trillion. So reparations based on what's in the American Rescue Plan or what's in the Justice for Black Farmers, yeah, it could be, it's no way, it no way touches on what our people, our blood, our sweat, our tears have given to this country. No way. So when you look at Mississippi, one state, $4 billion, think about that. Reparations for Black farmers is not even a check in a little box. Next slide, please. So the decades of sorrow when we started to lose our land, if you were listening carefully to Ms. Baskerville, she talked about when her family bought the land, it was at the height of the African-American land ownership. And these numbers are disputed by some. Some say it was 15 million acres, some say it was 19 million acres. The point is that we owned a lot of land that we acquired about 60 years out of slavery. But between that period and another 60 to 70 years, we lost anywhere from 90 to 97% of that land. We lost land at 3 times the rate of white farmers at the same period. We lost land due to unscrupulous practices from USDA, from lending institutions, from local units of government. We lost land because people walked away under the threat of death. We lost land for a number of reasons, but regardless the why or how we lost the land, the important thing is that as a people, a landless people is a powerless people. We can't afford to lose another blade of grass or grain of sand. We must begin to rebuild our land assets as a people in this country. Next slide, please. We're in what I call the second reconstruction. And that's where USDA, using its census that they do every 5 years, is where they track Black farmers. One of the things they're saying is that we have an increase. We don't have an increase of enough Black farmers. And that was evident again, if you look at what's in both the American Rescue Plan and the Justice for Black Farmers bill, it is looking at how do we build the base. We have less than 1% of farmers in this country are Black farmers. We must do better than that. We must build back up our land assets. We must be able to feed our communities. If the pandemic taught us nothing else, it taught us that most of the communities that we live in are at risk. We live in food deserts, or if not food deserts, at least we live in communities where there's lots of food insecurity. So having more Black farmers will help address that. And it's something that we need to do not only for our communities, but for the country. Next slide, please. So as I said before, making the land human. Teddy Roosevelt said, you should not forget that it will be just as important to our descendants to be prosperous in their time as it is for us to be prosperous in our time. We have to have land. We have to have a land asset that we can pass from generation to generation. This slide, land plus opportunity equals family wealth. The gentleman that's holding out something, it's a prawn. That particular farm is in Orange County, North Carolina. That farmer raised tobacco for 30 years. And with the tobacco buyout, he reinvented himself as a prawn farmer. And today he's one of the leading producers of freshwater prawns in North Carolina. But he's still farming. That's the key thing. He kept his land, he's still farming. He found something to do with it. Let's see, I guess it's the portrait style print with the trees. That's something that we don't think about as African Americans. We don't realize that we can do tree farming. That particular piece of land is in Dinwiddie County. The landowner spent about 15 years getting that property out of an heirs property status into an LLC owned by him and his brothers. His grandparents are buried just above the cliff. His grandmother's dying words to her daughter and her grandchildren is, please don't sell the land because my parents are buried here. What this land is now being used for is they've clear cut, and then they went back and reseeded or replanted, and it is now a Century Farm or Century Forest registered with the state of Virginia. They'll be growing longleaf pine, and it's also got about an acre in there you can't see that we're using for a co-cropping project with hemp and with trees. It's very important that we look at making sure that we get returns on our land and that we get returns fairly quickly. Trees, as most people don't think, are a crop you can raise just like tobacco. It just takes a little bit longer. And I would urge you, if you have trees, contact the Department of Forestry or contact the BFLT and let us help you make sure that you're getting the best use of that asset of your trees. Next slide. Okay. Here are our challenges. We've got to stop fracturing our land with each generation. And this is important because if we continue to fracture the land with each generation, we're going to end up with postage stamp pieces of land that have no value. They'll have no ag value, they'll have no commercial value, they'll have no residential value, and they'll have very little forestry value. So we've got to stop fracturing it. And when we stop fracturing it, we put it in family trust or LLCs, and that's a way of ensuring that that land's going to be there for the next generation. How do we have to create and operate small family-owned businesses. Small business, particularly small ag businesses, are the backbone of our agricultural economy. We can operate these businesses, and we have to help our young people. And we don't talk about, when we talk to young people, we don't talk about farming, we talk about entrepreneurial opportunities in agriculture. We talk about what is your return on investment. We talk about making a transition from what would be considered traditional ag to smart ag. How do we use technology? All of our young people are absolutely literate in all the technology, but how do we help them take that knowledge and transfer it to operating an agricultural or farm-based business? That's one of our challenges. And then how do we protect these assets long-term? We absolutely have to be able to put our land assets in some sort of entity that will protect it from heirs property, that will protect it from tax sales, that will protect it from neglect. And we do that by putting our land assets into trust or creating family-owned businesses, LLCs, something along those lines. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about some legislative wins that we've had. In 2020, the Black Family Land Trust, along with about 18, 19 other organizations, we were the lead, had introduced by Senators Frank Ruff and Delegate Patrick Hope, the Uniform Petition Heirs Property Act. And the Uniform Petition Heirs Property Act provides protection to people who find themselves in heirs property. And if you don't know what heirs property it is, it simply means that it's ownership in common. You own a share of the property. You don't own the property. You can't go and say, that's my 5 acres or that's my 6 acres. You own a share of it. And until we can divide it through the court, that's all you have is a share. The risk that we had with heirs property is something called partition sales, where someone buys into the family. I sell my share to Walmart or to the guy across the street, and then they just can force the family to sell the rest of the land, although the family may not want to do that. What the protections are that we have now is that, one, the court must get an independent appraisal. That means no more wink, wink, nod, nod, hunch, hunch sales of property for petition sales. Now, if the person, the tenant or the co-tenant who filed the action lives on the property, they can still participate in the action. The person who lives on the land now can exercise the first right of refusal. But most importantly, the court must consider the statutory factors that include co-tenants' sentimental attachment to the property because of ancestral or other special value. That's the most important part. That speaks directly to the phenomenology. It speaks directly to our land ethic. This land is important to us. It is who we are. We have a spiritual connection to our land. I live on land that's been in my family for multiple generations. Nothing helps me more on a bad day than to just go outside and walk around the land, and to think that my great-grandmother, who was born a slave, walked this very same land. I always say, if trees could talk, I'd love to hear the stories that the trees would tell. But that's one of the most important pieces that is in the Uniform Petition Act. And finally, the other piece that says, if the property can't be divided and it has to be sold, then it has to be sold at the appraisal price. You just can't undercut the price. Those are things that are important. The law went into effect on July 1, 2020. We have been working with several of our clients under the new law to be able to resolve their heirs property situations. We, as an organization, only work with landowners if they are serious and committed to retaining that land asset. It is so important to us and so important to our communities that we do this. This was a major win for us. We were number 19 in the country to adopt this. So the Uniform Petition Act now goes from Virginia, skip North Carolina, from South Carolina all the way down to Florida. And I'm just excited that we were able to do it, that the governor was supportive of it, and that we now have this on the books for our landowners, our heirs property landowners. Can I have the next slide, please? I also want to just tell you, in the 2021 session, we were able to get HB 2165 passed. And what that does is it gives some uniformity to how land is sold for delinquent taxes. It gives notice, tax sale notice, and the rights of redemption for heirs property. So if you are an heir and you didn't know you were an heir, or if you're an heir and you know and their property is being sold for delinquent taxes, you now have rights to redeem that land. And that's critically important. It's another tool in our toolkit for how we help our landowners retain their land assets. I invite you all to visit our website, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Ms. Locke.
Thank you so much, Ms. Alexander. This was a wealth of information, and I'm going to leave up your slide. Hopefully everyone is able to see bflt.org. Again, we just really encourage you to learn as much as you can. And also do know that we reached out to different individuals, different members of the General Assembly, delegates, and we are hoping to share this opportunity with others to just make sure that we stay informed what bills that are on the books now, but what's more to be done. So that's the first question that comes to us, Mrs. Alexander or Mrs. Baskerville. What's next? Where's the need for more legislation to help support Black landowners?
I would say that our first step is to step back and look at our families. We need to make sure that every family has a will, something we call asset protection. You need to have your will in place. And the other thing you have to do, even if you have a will, is ask yourself the question, when is it time to take my assets out of my name? We all have seen and heard instances where people have gotten ill and had to go into a state-supported nursing home, and the state took their assets. The state has a 5-year look back on that, but the question is, when do you need to take your assets out of your name? And that's one of the things that we encourage people, why we encourage people to look at putting their family land into a family trust or an LLC, because that reduces the amount of assets that you have at risk. So please look at getting a will. The other thing I would urge you to do is when you get a will, and I've had this discussion with lawyers a number of times, don't allow them to get you a junk will. A junk will is a will that simply says, I leave all my assets equally to my children. Well, you may as well die intestate. How do you divide a house 3 ways between your 3 children, or 5 ways, or 13 ways? How do you do that? So be very specific. And remember, all land, all children are not equal. Find out who wants the land or who doesn't, who wants to stay in, who doesn't. But make sure that you have those conversations with your family.
I would just add that one of the things we did consistently and conscientiously and intentionally was that every time there was sort of the big homecoming for the family church, we would invite those family members who were from out of state to go meet us at the gate to the home place, and let's just walk the land so they could really reconnect with the land. As I mentioned before, we had family members living in 5 different states other than Virginia. So if they just come in once a year and just, come in for homecoming and leave, it's going to be hard, very difficult to have those connections and those conversations with them. So I would just say communicating with your family members, connecting them with the land, finding out what their interests are, because not all family members would be interested maybe in the same type of project as forming a family LLC as others. So I would say the communication is critical.
Thank you for that information. We do have a few questions in the Q&A. But before we go into the questions, we actually have one of our delegates here. Thank you for joining us, Callie. She's a delegate for, and I'm not going to even say the name because I don't want to mess it up, but I want you to join in and just give information from your office to us so that we can learn more about what you're doing for the state of Virginia and for our citizens.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. My name is Callie. I'm actually the Chief of Staff for Delegate Ibrahim Samira, who represents the 86th District in Herndon. What we have really been working on, affordable housing has been a major issue for the delegate, especially in Northern Virginia, but as we've seen, it's spreading all over the state. So one of his main objective is providing affordable housing through zoning reform. And recently, this past legislation, he did introduce legislation to give localities the ability to establish land banks in their community and use some of those blighted properties that they talked about to revitalize the community and provide affordable housing for those who would not be able to have the opportunity of home ownership before then. So we plan to continue to work very closely with AARP to continue this work into next year. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be here and learn from all of these experiences.
Thank you so much, Callie, for jumping in. And again, we are just so thankful for you to be working on the weekend and to be able to sit in with us in ASALH. We have a couple of questions that have come in from the chat, but again, everyone that's attending, please type a question in the Q&A box so that we can make sure that we answer it live. One question, I believe this is for Ms. Alexander. Do these organizations only deal with rural lands? Does this apply to land in the urban areas, such as Washington metropolitan cities?
I'm not quite sure about the question. The BFLT works primarily in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, but there are organizations that work with families that have urban land. And I would suggest that you contact one of those.
Very good. And we have another question. How does the LLC pay the land taxes and other expenses?
I guess that's for me, just from a practical standpoint.
Yes.
Remember, I mentioned that at the same time we were forming the family LLC, the LLC was threatened by imminent domain issues with respect to the Atlantic Coastal Pipeline. That project has since been abandoned. But in the negotiation of the easement, the Dominion company, Atlantic Coastal Pipeline, we negotiated for the rights, the easement rights, okay? So that substantial sum was put into the LLC. From those current monies, then we can have our operating expenses paid for and our taxes. That is not to say that that's going to be the ongoing sort of process moving forward. We are actively, as family members, looking at ways to generate income off the land. So that's going to be the sort of the project for the next 2 to 3 years. Meanwhile, we certainly would like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to talk about or have some influence on or somehow remove that easement off of all of those lands, since the project has been abandoned, and that we can no longer have those easements on those lands.
Thank you, Mrs. Baskerville. We're all experiencing a little bit of weather challenges, so I'm just giving a heads up. If I go blank, just know that that's what's happening. We wish everyone safety, but we have one more question that's coming through. What is the first step in creating a family trust? And is land property needed first to start a family trust?
I'll take that. The first step is to make sure that that's what the family wants to do. You have to have 100% agreement from the family before you can even form the trust. So I think the first step in all of this is, if you have heirs property, is to begin with putting together your family tree. Find out who is an heir, find out who's not really an heir, have the contact information for them. You need telephone numbers, you need email addresses, you need physical street addresses. But you have to begin to put together that family tree. And then once you have that family tree together, you can begin to have discussions with the family about what the use of the land could and should be going forward.
And
no, you don't have to have money to start it. You can form the trust without having money. You can form the trust and not even have the land yet. The problem is all you have is a piece of paper. You've got to move the asset ownership to the trust once you've done that. So once you can actually run parallel tracks, form the trust legally, and then at the same time be talking to the family about what it is that they want to do. Find out who wants to move their shares over to the trust, who wants to be bought out, buy out those, move the rest. But it's no good unless you move the asset.
Ditto, and I just want to emphasize the heavy lift. The heavy lift is the family communications piece. It was a process of 5.5, 6 years, and that's just with 16 in 5 different states. If you have more than that or unknown individuals, it's going to be an intensive process. So the heavy lift is the communications and the decisions.
Thank you, Ms. Baskerville. There's another question from an individual that is wondering a little bit more about the Black Family Land Trust. Do we have other counterparts or other versions of your organization in other parts of the country? This person has land in Texas, and she would love for her family to, just really learn more how to reach out to professionals that could help. They are in Rusk County, Texas.
No, we do not have any other organizations. The BFLT doesn't have any offices anyplace else. We have worked in other states. We have a project in Vermont and one in Alabama upon request, but it really is dependent upon the request and whether or not we have the resources. If you're looking, you're in Texas, you're in a great spot. I would reach out to Thomas Mitchell, Professor Thomas Mitchell at A&M, Texas A&M. Thomas Mitchell is the author of the Uniform Petition Act, and his law clinic may have some programs that could help you.
Very good. And I see another question. How does agribusinesses or corporate farming impact the growth of Black-owned farms?
It depends on how you look at it. If you're talking about the large corporate farms, the way they impact the growth of Black-owned farms is that you don't have a competitive playing field. When you go to USDA or to your State Department of Ag, or you go to some of the banking institutions to apply for the loans that you need to operate your business, your acreage is small and your yield is going to be small, your profit will be smaller. So you can't really compete against them. What we're advocating right now through the BFLT and some of our advocacy work is we're advocating for an Office of Small Farms with USDA in this American Rescue Act as a pilot program, because we need somebody within USDA who is dedicated to helping small farmers be able to compete fairly. And why is it important that it's USDA? Because USDA is the only government organization, the only government entity that's charged with the agriculture and the food processing in our country. So we all pay taxes. We pay taxes to USDA, and we need for our small farmers to have this protection. You can go to any of your land grant institutions. They also have extension offices who work with small farmers to help you. There are a number of other organizations, but I think the big thing that we need to look at is how do we get USDA to begin to look at our small farmers as an asset to them, an asset to the country, and an asset to the communities that they live and work in.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. Did you happen to see that we have a couple of more questions coming through the Q&A session? I'm just going to read this one from Ms. Patty O'Reilly. Even if all heirs from one generation agree, how is the next generation required to pay taxes, etc.? Ms. Baskerville, have you had discussions about paying taxes and sharing that responsibility with other members of the family?
That was a difficulty before, getting members to pay their fair share of the taxes. We had to go hand in hand to individuals by deeding their interest into the LLC. The LLC is the responsible party for paying the taxes. And so that's why it's critical to have a management plan and an income producing plan moving forward. And that's what we're working on. I do want to make one more point. I talked about having the easements removed from the property since Dominion has abandoned that project. There's also the issue for those landowners that had to secure legal advice that they be compensated for the expenses paid to the attorney, which in some cases is substantial. Dominion is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But Dominion should also help restore those monies into those parties' pockets so that they can then use that funding for management, for growing their LLC, growing their land, using their land. That is all part of reparations too. Just don't say we abandoned the project. Say we're going to help you get on their feet. So I would encourage anyone who has influence to Dominion to make sure they understand that those individual landowners need to be reimbursed their legal fees and expenses as well.
Thank you, Ms. Baskerville. We are drawing close to time, but if we could sneak in one more question, how can we be more supportive of your work, Mrs. Alexander? We have a couple of people that are interested in helping to learn more or to be more supportive. I think we even have a few individuals that are saying that this would be a great topic for ASALH at the national conference. Just share what can we do? What can we talk up amongst ourselves and our organizations?
A couple of things. I've been asked to present a paper to ASALH to speak at the national organization, and I just have not done it. I didn't think that. I haven't done it. Just leave it at that. I will do it. What can you do? The first thing you can do is talk with your family members. Just get them to understand that that little 20 acres of land in Mecklenburg County or Brunswick County or Prince George's County, Maryland, that land is an asset. As Ms. Baskerville said at the beginning, this is it. Guys aren't making anymore. Land is a finite commodity. If you own it, you own a piece of the earth. And think about how significant and important that is, not only to you, but to future generations. Help people understand, have a will, so that there's an orderly transfer of your assets from one generation to the next. And don't get confused by assets. Don't think that assets mean that you have to have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Everything you own is an asset. Your share in that land is an asset. The house you live in, the car you drive, the cup you drank your coffee out of this morning, all of that is an asset. And when we talk to people about their assets, I always remind them of two things. One, if you think that what you own isn't an asset, drive through any community in the spring and in the summer, and what do you see? Yard sales. What are people selling? Their items, their possessions, their assets, and they're selling them for money. So that means that what you own is an asset. Think about how you want your assets to transfer to the next generation. And the other thing I tell people is there's no such thing as bad land. Don't ever let anybody say, oh, well, it's wetland or it's swamp, it's this. Think of Hilton Head, South Carolina. That was bad land. Now it's $500 a night to go to sleep and play golf on the bad land. So what can you do to help the BFLT? We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. If you go to our webpage, there's a donate button. We'd appreciate any contributions, but refer us to your family and friends. Let us help you help your family save their number one asset, their land. And let us help you look to see how we can put those assets back into production so that they can become performing assets for current and future generations.
Thank you, Mrs. Baskerville, and thank you, Mrs. Alexander. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Cassandra so that she can wrap us up. It's truly my pleasure. It's my honor to meet you both, and thank you for all that you're doing. Just want a quick plug, make sure that you know that AARP needs you to help volunteer with us. We have a lot of Zooms and virtual events. We could really use other ideas for other opportunities to connect, but we work with our volunteers. So I salute our volunteers. Michelle Evans Oliver is one of our greatest volunteers. And again, I'm just so thankful that all of this came together with the help of everyone volunteering their time and expertise over the weekend. So thank you. Dr. Cassandra, turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Janaea. I have pages of notes, the power in the land and getting a breakdown about the importance. I grew up hearing about land passing hands in my family in Nottoway County. And so now I've already texted my father. I've already texted my friends. I need to know where that land is. Where are the papers? So I thank you so much for bringing this to us. Sit-ins have historically been used to galvanize our communities and as a form of protest. So this is our form of protest. We're going to find out where our land is, where our papers are, and we're going to galvanize our own families because there's power in ownership of land. Some of the things our communities have been marginalized and do not know, we know today thanks to Miss Alexander and Miss, I still call her the Honorable Viola Baskerville. I can't let that go, I'm sorry. So we are just so thankful for all of you and all of the ASALH chapters that joined us. This is our mission, right? To protect our legacy, right? To hand it down to our heirs. So we are so thankful for Barbara Dunn, our Vice President of Membership, joining us, and Zebulon is on. I'm not sure of Zebulon's title, but I know he's very active on the ASALH National Board, and certainly for our President, Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, and all of our local members. So many of them are on, and we're so grateful. And I saw some of my college classmates, so I hope they got that from Facebook. But we are so glad that each one of you could join us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month as we sit in again with Reverend Elijah Burke, who's on today as well. And he will be doing a freedom rider story, The Power of the Black Church in Community Activism today, not just yesterday, but today. So we thank you all again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you. Our ASALH RVA branch is a membership organization. So if you're interested in this topic and preserving any of our African American legacy, please reach out to us. We would love to have you. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Janaea.
Thank you, ladies. Have a good night. Be safe.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Keep
Thank you.